atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima killed between 90,000 and 140,000 people. According to census records from June of 1945, the population of Hiroshima was 255,260 people. In comparison, the bombing of just 3 major cities in 1962 would have resulted in the death of tens of millions of people. The bomb dropped on Hiroshima and the bomb dropped on Nagasaki remain the only 2 instances of nuclear weapons being used in combat, but that almost wasn't the case. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, 2 superpowers were playing a game of chicken with nuclear consequences. Humans are mercurial, and during the Cuban Missile Crisis, that should have been detrimental. Yet, it wasn't. More remarkably, the Cuban Missile Crisis didn't escalate beyond the point it did, and JFK's leadership skills likely saved millions of people. When the Soviets found themselves the target of many European and American missiles, they needed a way to remove the Western missiles or level the playing field. The Soviets had effective medium-range and intermediate-range ballistic missiles, but no intercontinental ballistic missiles. Due to their circumstance, they placed missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles south of Florida. The missiles leveled the playing field and deterred further U.S. aggression. It was a logical solution, but a dangerous one, and it caused the most stressful 2 weeks of the 20th century. From October 15th to October 28th, the Soviets and the U.S. engaged in an intense standoff regarding Soviet missiles in Cuba. On October 14th, 1962, a U-2 spy plane recorded photographic evidence of Soviet MRBMs being assembled in Cuba. The Soviet Union was deploying missiles in Cuba. On October 16th, a group was assembled, known as the Executive Committee. JFK and XCOM deemed the nukes unacceptable and debated and deliberated options, including a bombing and full-scale invasion. On October 27th, the conflict was resolved when the U.S. agreed to never invade Cuba and the USSR agreed to remove its missiles from Cuba. Later that day, in private, the U.S. agreed to remove its missiles in Turkey. The Cuban Missile Crisis was always one step, one rash decision, or one unfortunate twist of fate from reaching nuclear war. What would have happened if the U-2 flight was delayed? Cloud cover had delayed previous reconnaissance flights over Cuba. Kennedy's decisions would have been rushed, leading to erratic and spontaneous judgments. The situation was balancing on the ridge of a mountain, and the slopes on either side were steep. Any mistake could have led to a steep tumble down the side of the mountain, eventually landing in the valley of total destruction. The stakes were high. 66 B-52s carrying hydrogen bombs were constantly airborne, and 162 nuclear weapons were deployed in Cuba during the crisis. A Soviet B-59 submarine encounters the quarantine. When warships dropped warning depth charges, the crew had guessed that war had been declared, due to the crew having lost contact with Moscow for several days. Firing the submarine's torpedo without a direct order from Moscow required the consent of all 3 senior officers aboard the submarine. 2 of the 3 officers voted to fire the torpedo, but luckily, the last did not. Finally, the B-59 surfaced and returned to the Soviet Union. Another incredibly close call was when Major Rudolf Anderson was shot down while flying a U-2 over Cuba. Following his death, the U.S. readied an invasion in Florida. The invasion was never launched. JFK's resistance to peer pressure and cautious decisions proved he was an incredible leader. Many of his peers in the XCOM were pushing for military action, despite the presence of mutually assured destruction. If the Soviets attacked the U.S., then the U.S. would fight back, and vice versa. When the other members of the XCOM voted for military action, Kennedy understood the consequence of MAD and insisted on a diplomatic resolution. As James Clear outlines in his book Atomic Habits, humans are strongly influenced by the close, the many, and the powerful. John F. Kennedy resisted the influence of all 3 groups at once. He had friends and family in XCOM. The majority of the group pushed for military action, and everyone in the group was a major politician or government official. Not only did Kennedy resist the strong pull of the XCOM group, which is remarkable on its own, he also made very smart and thought-out decisions. He established a naval quarantine and not a blockade, avoiding a declaration of war. He refused to attack when an American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba because, unlike his advisors, he believed that the attack was not ordered by the Kremlin. He also avoided war when he let a Soviet oil tanker through the quarantine. Stopping or attacking the ship could have led to war. Kennedy's remarkable leadership skills and mental fortitude proved that he was clearly one of the greatest American leaders. Due partly to luck and partly to JFK's incredible leadership, the Cuban Missile Crisis never escalated to nuclear war. If it had, mass destruction and the death of millions would have followed. When there is a risk or presence of destruction, death, or failure, one must analyze what happened and why it happened. What if Adolf Hitler had been accepted into art school? The Holocaust likely never would have happened. Henry L. Stimson, the U.S. Secretary of War in 1945, went on a honeymoon in Kyoto, Japan. It was because of this honeymoon that Stimson had an appreciation and admiration of Kyoto. He pushed to keep Kyoto off the list of atomic bombing targets, and Nagasaki replaced it. If Stimson had his honeymoon somewhere else, it is likely that those who died during the bombings of Nagasaki would have lived, and those who were in Kyoto during the time would have died. When one explores alternate histories, it results in newfound gratitude. As the ancient Roman philosopher Cicero once said, "Gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues, but the parent of all others."